I'm calling this meeting to order. This is a Redmond City Council study session held on Tuesday, February 25th, 2025, commencing at 7 p.m. Council members in attendance are Councilmember Stewart, Council Vice President Forsyth, Councilmember Anderson, Councilmember Salahuddin is with us online, and myself, Council President Kritzer. Councilmember Nueva Comuna will not be joining us today, and if Councilmember Fields arrives, I will announce him when he arrives. There are 4 items on our agenda tonight: the Redmond 2050-2025 Code Package Planning Commission recommendation, ordinance amending the Redmond Municipal Code, Section 13.25, temporary construction dewatering, council talk time, and an executive session on potential litigation. The first item on the agenda is Redmond 2050-2025 Code Package Planning Commission recommendation, and Carol Helland, our Director of Planning and Community Development, will be introducing this item. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Presiding Officer Kritzer. I am actually Council President Kritzer, and council members, good evening. So over the past few months, the Planning Commission has reviewed a significant amount of development regulations to implement the policies that you put in place as part of Redmond 2050. And the staff briefed you on this topic on February 4th at the Committee of the Whole. Specifically, a lot of this information is about the zoning consolidation that we did and the changes we needed to make in response to the development regulations. So since we saw you on February 4th, on February 12th, the Planning Commission concluded its review and did finalize the package and prepare a recommendation and report for transmittal to you. That material is actually in your packet materials tonight, but we did send it to you on the 14th, so you had the opportunity to review it a little bit ahead of time if you were able to do so. And on February 4th, the council members also asked for a recap of the package and identified discussion topics. So responses to those discussion items were also placed in your packet materials. And tonight I'm joined by Lauren Alpert and Ian Lefcourt and Becky Fry and Jeff Churchill. We also have Audra Cardenas online who can provide a recap and answers to the questions about the responses that were provided in your packet this evening. So our council ask for tonight is to provide direction on these discussion items so that the staff can prepare an ordinance for final consideration and passage by the council later this spring. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Becky Fry to provide the beginning of the recap.
Good evening, Council. The first part of this package is what we're referring to as zones and uses. It focuses on the land uses and the zone-specific regulations. Most of this work is found in Article 1 of the Zoning Code. As Director Helen mentioned, it does complete the consolidation of zones from Redmond 2050 from 50 zones to, as we started, to the 20 zones. It gives us an opportunity also to streamline our regulations, and we have completely rewritten Article 1 of the Redmond Zoning Code. The only portion of Article 1 that really does not have any significant changes is in Chapter 2114, which is our BP and P&I. And we've made some minor updates, but we've moved regulations from that chapter to 2104, and that's the substantial change in that chapter. Otherwise, the rest of Article 1 has been rewritten, and it's brand new. So what we have in 2104 is almost all use-based regulations have been moved to this chapter. There are a few that are set aside, like our step housing is still in its own chapter. But this consolidates over 150 use tables into 2. It also makes it significantly easier to identify if there are conditions, limitations, or special regulations attached to the uses. So it'll be easier for staff and the community as well. The Planning Commission is recommending some use-based regulation updates that implement Redmond 2050 goals, including for complete neighborhoods, nightlife in our centers, et.cetera. However, we do want to point out that this work was not scoped to do a complete overhaul of which uses are allowed in every zone, and so that might be something that we would look at in a future update. We are, however, in this package have included a few things that I do want to point out. The community expressed significant support for food trucks and food truck courts, so that's a brand new use that will be allowed for the first time. And we also have some uses that we have added in conjunction with the work with our economic development team, including accessory commercial, which adds some additional flexibility for businesses that have been displaced to go temporarily into other locations where they might not be allowed otherwise, and clarifying active use retail for areas where we really want to see high pedestrian activity. In 2105, this is the chapter that we just adopted in last November's package. It establishes our special districts, our overlays. This is the home for our TOD focus areas. And so what is in this package, the Planning Commission is recommending TOD focus areas for downtown and Marymore, as well as creating the Marymore Village Arts and Cultural District and the Inclusive Neighborhood Pilot Project. So those are found in 2105. Within the zoning district chapters, which are listed at the top of the slide, there's several of them, we are significantly streamlining the zoning district chapters using tables to display development regulations. There have been some structural consistency happening. We've also updated public realm standards in relationship of the building to that public realm sidewalks and that interaction. The main thing that people are really interested in following are the building heights. And building heights are now going to be measured across the board in feet instead of stories. We are working towards a goal of 12-story building being allowed within those TOD focus areas with incentives and design standard options. In downtown, the changes are fairly modest and mostly a result of the consolidation of the 12 downtown zones into 3, as well as moving away from parcel size-based regulations. So there are some changes that are happening, but they are relatively modest. The largest change really is in the TOD focus area, going up to that 144 feet or 12-story goal. In Marymore Village, the allowed building heights are doubling, with today allowing about 5 or 6 stories and transitioning up to the 144 feet in the TOD focus area. Again, that does require the use of incentives and design standards to go with that, to get that height. In the regional retail area, which is our big box area, that is going to urban mixed use, and that will allow building heights similar to what we see in downtown. But we have more non-residential uses, and we have a no net loss of commercial square footage in there to keep the commercial viability of that area and those uses in our community. And so the building types will be more non-residential in nature than what we're typically seeing in downtown today. There are a couple of other things that we do want to mention. The Planning Commission recommendation includes a number of areas that build in some flexibility on building height. For instance, in the critical aquifer recharge area where temporary construction dewatering will be limited, it does allow an additional 12 feet in building height for and above ground parking structure. There are some design requirements that go with that. We also have some first floor ceiling height requirements for mixed use and non-residential buildings as a part of our business displacement work, so that we have spaces that businesses can move into that meet their needs. But in response to some developer feedback on that additional first floor might sacrifice an upper story housing floor, we've had built in some flexibility so that if you do have to bump it up to meet those first floor ceiling heights, you can transfer that additional height to the top so you don't lose a story of housing. We also have a couple of other things that are built into here. There's some flexibility through updates in the design standards that you'll see later this spring, where the FAR can be moved around for certain corner treatments, et cetera. All of these regulations are really intended to create a diverse building form in new construction while still providing some predictability to the community. The second part is where the requirements and incentives. This part focuses on city regulations, citywide regulations, especially on affordable housing, green building, and our new incentive program chapter. I do want to note really quickly that in 2116, you'll see it is in yellow on this slide deck, which yellow indicates there's a major edit. It's mostly just a consolidation of that type of information for multiple locations and just removing duplications. I did want to point out, though, that one of the council requests is actually folded into 2116. So we had promised to go through and scour the code to make sure passive house and other green building technologies, if there needs to be an adjustment, that we can make that. There is an edit in 2116 that reflects that, so that if you have one of those green building techniques and you need some flexibility in your setback or building height to meet the mechanical needs of that technology, that is allowed in that. So that is in 2116. There's also a clarification in 2016 so that we can ensure elevator access to rooftop amenities, because we're starting to encourage those rooftop uses.
Thank you, Becky. 2120 is the home of our affordable housing regulations in the zoning code. Consistent with the Redmond 2050 approach, the updated zones that Becky just described now have updated affordability parameters designed for those specific zones. Previously, most of the city had one uniform affordable housing parameter. That is no longer the case. Mandatory affordability requirements were adjusted when financial feasibility analysis concluded that, combined with all the other regulatory changes, there was a sufficient capacity to accept new affordability parameters. Updated, we see Marymore Center and the urban mixed-use zone, and there are no changes to the mandatory inclusionary zoning for downtown center and the corridor mixed-use zone. Also consistent with the Redmond 2050 approach is that the mandatory affordable housing requirements now generally align with the voluntary MFTE, multifamily tax exemption program requirements. The notion is that when a development qualifies for the required affordability, they're essentially automatically qualifying for the MFTE as well to help development. There are some situations where they're not aligned, like the corridor mixed use. IZ is not updated, but it's in a new mixed use MFTE residential targeted area. But generally, the MFTE and IZ now align. And as noted, the new zones sometimes required updates to existing residential targeted areas and creation of new residential targeted areas. As a reminder, those are city-designated areas within which development can qualify for MFTE. Overall, the housing changes prioritize 50% AMI units over 80% AMI units, again consistent with the Redmond 2050 approach. And to discuss another city mechanism for achieving city goals, I'll welcome back Becky Fry.
So moving on to chapter 2155. This is going to be a brand new chapter. It becomes the home for all of our incentive programs. Currently, they're scattered and hiding in multiple places throughout the code, and some are not used because people don't find them. This replaces that patchwork of incentive programs with a unified approach. It is built upon what we had just adopted for Overlake, so it uses the same structure and many of the same incentives and just expands it further. Like in Overlake, the downtown and Marymore centers will require at least one item from each of the 5 major categories, but there are many options to choose from, and it doesn't require certain cost. It could be a no-cost item or a low-cost item, but something from each of the 5 main will be required for in the centers. However, outside of the centers, the FAR and building heights that are needed for those areas are significantly less, and so that requirement's not the same. So they can just use it as a full-blown menu of options. We have kept the bonus track approach, but we've added on to that. So we have 3 ways now to achieve extra bonuses. If 4 or more items are chosen from any of those tracks, it automatically extra points are added. This helps us maximize the impacts for our equity and inclusion, arts and culture, and child-friendly amenities and spaces. So there's those 3 bonus tracks now. And again, if you just select those items, it counts them all up, it'll automatically be added. For green building, this package also includes another area that council asked us to work on, which is expanding the mandatory green building requirements. We've taken the same mandatory features that we adopted for Overlake and make them required for all centers, and where it makes sense, expanded some of those to other areas as well. We've also incorporated the EV charging infrastructure requirements based on council directions. So those will be found now in 2167. There's some minor edits to 2110 to just cross-reference things back and make sure everything's not duplicating each other. So for the timeline, we have a study session scheduled for March 25th as needed to continue discussion on the Planning Commission's recommendation. Ian will be scheduling a public hearing with the council for updates for the residential targeted area boundaries for the MFTE program, similar to what you just did last fall, but for these particular zoning districts. We are aiming for a June adoption for a combined package with the design standards and all the housing updates. But this concludes our high-level summary of this package. I'll turn it back to Council President to begin working through the issues matrix. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I'll just open it up first in case council members have questions, and we can, if you want to incorporate any questions on the issues matrix, there are only 4 or 5 on there. So I'll just open it up and ask other questions from the council. Council Vice President Forsyth.
Thank you. Thank you for the green build passive house accommodation in that language. Making it clear is super helpful, and I know that was one of my main nits that I was picking at, so I really, really appreciate that. The conversation around height and floor level height, I recall talking about that years ago when I first got onto council, and how there was an instance where a developer was wanting to do like 12-story floors, or 12, anyway, very tall floors, and yes, and how we learned of this as being an issue. Since we now have that height regulation, and we have the ground floor height for businesses, is there any concern about someone coming in and potentially say, like, we would expect there to be 8 floors above, but they want to do 6 so that they can have super high ceilings? Is there anything that I missed in here about any regulation around that?
No, the way it is written is it's stories neutral. So if they want to do 6 or 8, it doesn't matter as long as they fit within the height.
Okay.
So it allows them to design to meet their needs and their desires. And
Do we have, so I guess my concern for that would be, on a developer side, it probably wouldn't, the math wouldn't math for that to work out. But if it were to happen, I could see where we would start building potentially luxury apartments, and kind of goes against what we in this community want to see. Is there any thought around what we as a city would do if that started occurring?
I'll say that's something we can monitor for. I think you are correct that the math won't math for that. You're giving up a lot of units and a lot of revenue to make that happen in a space that's going to be more expensive to build. But I think it's certainly something to monitor, and if there is an issue that arises, that's something we could come back to the council with.
Great, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you so much. Reading these 2 pieces is a bit like how you feel after you've tackled that closet you've been meaning to organize. You know where everything needs to go, but it takes a lot of work to get it all in its place, and this is years in the making, and it's just really, really well done. To the earlier point about the accommodations for different modulations that more sustainable builds might need, what I read in the code there is just like a commitment to be reasonable and to take a project at face value, and to really communicate our values to developers who are eventually going to be building that housing. One of my main concerns, which was captured in the issues matrix, it is absolutely a closed concern of mine. I think when we put that matrix together, we actually didn't have the code in front of us yet, or the recommendations. I was looking to see that the values from the comprehensive plan had been translated into this package. It is so obvious all throughout, but I'll share my 2 favorite examples just in plain language for the community, because I think it's important. So for instance, on the food trucks, I'm glad you mentioned those tonight. That chapter starts by saying, purpose, implement the comprehensive plan goals for supporting small businesses and complete neighborhoods. Those are like 2 things that were so, wildly important to our community in this process. Also, Marymore Village is an inclusive neighborhood with regulations that implement universal design and inclusive design to implement the Redmond Comprehensive Plan. So just very well done, and I appreciate all of the work of the Planning Commission. I am getting to my question, but one last comment. I wanted to acknowledge that the council received a memo from Commissioner Copley regarding asking us to monitor the impact of affordability requirements in Marymore and consider a change sometime down the line if development were not to occur. That recommendation from the commission is to stick with the stronger affordability requirement right now, and I'm most comfortable with that. As we are with the whole plan, we will monitor and adjust as needed. So my next question then is from chapter 21 for 210 regarding accessory commercial, and that is designed, pieces of that chapter are designed to battle displacement of Redmond businesses during redevelopment. I know with these things that not every solution works for every kind of business that might be facing displacement. So I was wondering if you could interpret for us a little bit what kind of situation this solution might be workable for, what kind of businesses might be able to benefit from this new piece of code.
There's actually, this is based off of something that was worked out and is already being utilized by one business in our community. And our economic development folks said, let's try to figure out a way to get this into code so that it's available for everybody as a permanent solution. And so what we are seeing, and what this does to provide a little bit more information, is it says that if you cannot find a place to go in a zone that allows your use right now, but you can find somebody who has extra space in their building right now that they need somebody to help fill that space, you can partner with them and move in as long as that existing business and that the primary use of that space still complies with the underlying zoning use requirements. So it's not a permanent solution. They cannot replace the existing business. It is a partnership opportunity, but it does allow for a business to have a more permanent solution than trying to find a bouncing solution as they try to go back and forth between different locations. I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, this was actually the circumstance that Becky's talking about was at the Unicy building. It was, they have reduced the footprint of the office spaces that they used in that building, but they're not planning on leaving. But they also, the zone was pretty restrictive and they really couldn't use it for a different purpose. So we were able to actually work to interpret the code in a way that allowed a CPA to move into that space. It didn't displace any of their space, but it just made some of their space usable to some flexible other uses, with the understanding that to the extent that if they ever moved out completely, the building would have to be re-tenanted in some way. But it didn't leave their space empty and leave people without a home, so it allowed for a more adaptive transitional use. And we actually ran into them at the Port of Seattle State of the Port. I ran into someone from there and he was so appreciative.
That is absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for answering my question and sharing more about this homegrown solution. I love it.
I will just follow up on that quick, because I don't see other hands up, just in terms of following the thread around commercial. I'm curious if you can just speak to specifically in the updates on mixed use to promote neighborhood commercial. You mentioned it in the matrix as a follow-up. Can you share a little bit more around the bounds that that we're putting as part of those updates around those kind of neighborhood commercial uses?
Yeah, I'll kick it off, but if Lauren wants to jump in and add anything. The basic approach that we were making for this particular package is there are certain uses that we've just allowed as permitted. Those are low-intensity uses. For the most part, though, what you'll see is a complete overhaul of the home-based business regulations. So those are also in 2104 as well. So if you haven't looked through those, we do plan on tackling another set of updates to that with our economic development folks over the next year or two. But that adds some flexibility. And then, do you want to explain our neighborhood mixed-use approach?
We looked at our neighborhood mixed-use areas and looked at what there was a comprehensive process led by OJA mostly in doing kind of an analysis of the parcels. OJA, did you want to speak to the analysis that you did on the parcels for the neighborhood mixed use? But before we did that analysis, we did that process of looking at complete neighborhoods and looking at what are the sort of uses that are missing from a lot of our neighborhood areas, and looking at what the community would tolerate in what scale they would tolerate that in the neighborhoods.
But Audra, if you want
Sure. Yes, so the parcels that were selected for the neighborhood mixed use, we did this analysis called Complete Neighbors Analysis, where we looked at all the businesses and services that are right now in our neighborhoods, and we created these heat maps that you can see in a story map. And based on that, we identified areas that have no business or services. That was like the first pass. And then we went and looked at those areas and selected some parcels that could fill that gap, basically. And we ended up with around 70 parcels. Then we did a community outreach. We sent postcards to one of our mixed-use events to those owners, parcel owners, and then we talked to them. And after that, we also did targeted outreach. We called them and set up like meetings with them to talk about this neighborhood mixed use a possibility for their parcels, and then we ended up with 19 owners that are interested in these this kinds of small scale businesses in their parcel. So that's like very a very big summary on how we got to that neighborhood mixed use, and then based on that we developed the regulations and all the allowed uses.
The development standards have been designed so that the buildings are comparable in shape and size and bulk. And so we've kept it so that it's still neighborhood scale. You're not going to see anything that feels like it should be in downtown pop up in your neighborhoods.
That's wonderful. I asked a pretty broad question, hoping to get a lot of detail, and I did. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Are there other questions from the council? I'm going to check online too. Not seeing any at the moment. Anything else? All right, great. Well, I will just ask one final question, and then maybe we'll check in on whether council wants to have another study session on this, or whether we're good to move forward with this. One question that I had, just going back to the question about height, which I think seems like there's a lot of good flexibility with that change. Is there any adjustments that we've thought about doing in terms of how we share about that to ensure there's some understandability from the average reader, just because, I think there is like a transparency change. If it's easy to understand an 8-story building, it's harder to understand what a 144-foot building is.
Yeah. We're working on a number of materials and website updates, and so it'll be slowly rolling out as we get time to implement all of those, but we do have a number of materials that we'll be putting out for educational purposes for the community members and developers as well, because there's a lot of new provisions, a lot of new flexibility in there, so we want to make sure that people understand the different paths. And also, I'll be available for developers if they're like, wait a minute, what do I do? So before I even think of something, they can come and chat and look at the different pathways in front of it too. So we are preparing a number of resources that should be extremely helpful. We do still tend to use some equivalencies. Like tonight, I've said, yeah, we're aiming for a 12-story building, right? So we are using some equivalencies, understanding that they might only want 11 stories or,
Great, thank you. And yeah, I think that point about actually the making materials accessible to developers to know about all the different types of flexibility and incentives, especially given that we do have some things in here like the inclusionary zoning, which is offset by a lot of what we're offering here. So being able to make that super clear, I think, is great. One actual quick question, and then I'll be done with mine on the inclusionary zoning. Is this going to be tiered like we did in Overlake in terms of the rollout?
No. And the reason for that is when the Planning Commission and staff explored that option, we proportioned the steps based on the relative growth that was being allocated to those areas. And so because Overlake was receiving much more growth than Marymore, the small step size effectively made very minimal impacts, either 0 or like 0.1. And so it did not seem like there was a lot of value added through that approach.
Great, thank you. And I know some of that issue was also raised in the letter we received, so just wanted to ask that question. Thanks so much. Any other questions? Oh, Council Vice President Forsyth.
Sorry, one more. This word is the bane of my existence. So on the daycare centers located in residential zones shall operate between the hours of 5 a.m. and 10 p.m. We have often said that shall means must, and legally shall means must, and I don't think that's the intent of this line, so.
That is not, we have been trying to do a replacement, so if we miss that one, we'll go ahead and tackle that as an edit.
It's K on page 117 of that packet.
Okay, thank you for
Thank
bringing
you.
that up.
All right, so Council, does anyone feel that we need another study session on this, or are we good to advance this to an upcoming business meeting? Seeing thumbs up. Not seeing any other questions, so it seems like we don't necessarily need another study session on this, and you can propose what date it would be prepared for a future business meeting. Do you think it'd be ready for March 4th, or would we do the letter out?
So
More to do. Are we going to wait to adopt along with the third part? Okay, so we may actually need the study session for that part. Will that be ready by?
No, there will be study sessions in May for the third part.
Great.
But we're aiming for June 17th at this time for this material and the third part and some housing amendments that you'll also see in the spring that the Planning Commission is going to start working on in March.
Great. Well, so then, Mayor Burney, did you have something to say?
I just wanted to echo Councilmember Stewart's comments. This team has done, just a phenomenal job working through all of this, and I know that we've all been through the comprehensive plan process, which they also, many bodies in this city work through in our community. But it's really kind of wonderful to see it come through in such a clear and concise fashion. Really well organized. Thank you so much. I appreciate the thought that they put into listening to the community and the development community and anyone who tried to work through our code, and it became extremely confusing. And so I just think they have set a fantastic standard for starting us out on a, refining something to be a good start is amazing and really difficult. So I just want to tell them kudos, blast it out to the community of what a great job they've done, and I appreciate everything they've done here, and I know the next two parts that come forward, or a few parts that come forward before adoption, will be just as fantastic. So thank you all very much for all this great work.
Thank you, Mayor Burney, and wonderful sentiments, and definitely I agree wholeheartedly. Really appreciate all of your hard work, and looking forward to seeing this continuing. I guess Council, since we will not be voting on this until we vote on the rest of it, know that I'm sure you can ask questions, but we won't be revisiting these two parts unless anyone brings that up. Otherwise, we'll assume that this is closing out this part, and we'll look at the other pieces and then adopt later this year. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The next item on our agenda is is an ordinance amending the Redmond Municipal Code, Section 13.25, temporary construction dewatering. And Chris Stenger, Public Works Deputy Director, will introduce this item. Go ahead.
Good evening, council members and mayor. I'm Deputy Director Chris Stenger over Environmental Programs and Utilities. Tonight I'm joined by Aaron Moldver, Environmental Programs Section Manager, and Jessica Atkinson, Senior Environmental Scientist. Excuse me. We're here this evening to provide a bit of a deeper dive into the rationale and history of Redmond Municipal Code 13.25, temporary construction dewatering. Tonight, Jessica will talk through the background leading up to the code amendments. The code amendments themselves our next steps in the council process and answer any questions you might have. And now I'll turn it over to Jessica.
Thank you very much. So we'll just go ahead and dive right into the presentation. So tonight, we'll be looking at an overview of the Temporary Construction Dewatering, or TCD, policy analysis. This has been going on for a while, so it's good to take a little step back and have some background on this. And then we are also here to confirm that these proposed amendments to Redmond Municipal Code 1325, or Temporary Construction Dewatering, can be packaged with the Redmond 2050 code amendments that you just heard about, because there's some elements in that code package that need to be adopted at the same time this one is. Originally, I think it was supposed to be adopted April 15th, but Jeff, sorry, I was trying to get his attention. It looks like at the last presentation that we just heard, that might have been moved to June, so that might have to be updated for this presentation, so I apologize about that. So let's take a little look at the timeline for the council decisions and the stakeholder involvement with this project. So on this timeline, council decisions are shown in white and stakeholder outreach is in yellow. So as I mentioned, this started a while ago. In March of 2021, staff presented phase 1 of this project, which was a triple bottom line analysis, where we looked at the economic, social, and environmental costs and benefits of dewatering. We had a targeted stakeholder group, and that was comprised of members of our community that represented environmental, economic, and social elements as well to help inform this triple bottom line analysis. We'll get into more details in further slides about what decisions were made with that. In December of 2021, phase 2, the policy analysis, was presented to council. And again, that targeted stakeholder group also helped inform some of the recommendations that we brought to council. Phase 3, which are the policy recommendations and the interim dewatering limitations that we put in place, occurred in Q3 of 2022. And again, we had the targeted stakeholder group help with that. In addition, by this time, Redmond 2050 had started up. They were great partners with us and let us use some of their outreach to get more information about the temporary construction dewatering policy. And finally, here we are today in 2025 with the final dewatering code amendments. And additionally, their targeted stakeholder group has been great. They followed us through this entire process to keep informing us. We've also done outreach through Redmond 2050. And then we've started doing some e-newsletters directly out to developers to just make them aware of these changes that are coming up. Additionally, any development review project that has come into the city for permitting processes for the past year has been told about these upcoming changes so that everybody's aware of that. So some of you may recall we were all here last year, a year ago, doing a study session along with our colleagues from the water operations to talk about our aquifer, our drinking water source. So just really wanted to highlight that again. We're really lucky here in Redmond where we have a dual water system. That means that we have 2 different supplies of our drinking water. One comes from purchasing water from Cascade Water Alliance that is located in the Tolt Reservoir, and that is piped to Redmond. That provides about 60% of our drinking water. The additional 40% comes from our groundwater source. So we have 5 supply wells located here in Redmond that we pump the groundwater from. So the map that we're looking at here, you might be familiar with that. We showed that at the study session last year. Our aquifer is located in the dark areas, which are the lowlands of Redmond. So to kind of orient you with this map here, this lighter area is Education Hill. Here's Sammamish River. We're about right here at City Hall. Here's Bear Creek and then Evans Creek. So again, our aquifer lies in that darker area of the map. The supply wells are shown with the blue stars on the map. Our aquifer is very, very shallow. It's especially in the wintertime, it's only about 5 to 10 feet to the groundwater. Again, it provides 40% of our drinking water. And the second source of drinking water from the groundwater really increases our resilience here in the city. If there is some type of disruption from the Tolt pipeline, such as an earthquake, we have this second source of water here. Additionally, with predictions of climate change, in this area, surface water is much more susceptible to climate change impacts than groundwater is. So it's really, really a great resource. We're lucky to have that here in the city. You might have noticed the location of our aquifer also happens to be in downtown in Marymore Village, where we're having light rail and we're really, focusing a lot of our growth. Because of the very shallow depth to groundwater, there's been this tension point between more of this compact development and our water resource protection. So because we're seeing more mixed-use residential in these areas and underground parking associated with that, a very common technique to construct in this type of environment is using temporary construction dewatering. So again, just really quickly, temporary construction dewatering is the artificial lowering of the groundwater level. So the schematic here is really basic, but it gives you the idea. In this red line right here represents the natural groundwater level, 5 to 10 feet below ground surface. Some of these parking structures, can be 10 to 15 feet below ground surface. So to be able to construct in dry, constructible conditions, dewatering wells will be drilled around the construction site and pumped. The water that is pumped from the ground is typically discharged into the stormwater conveyance system and eventually ends up in the Sammamish River. So in this schematic here, the groundwater level is lowered below the excavation depth. However, you can see that in the schematic, it doesn't just lower the groundwater level at the construction site. Because our aquifer is so transmissive, basically water moves through it very, very quickly, any pumping will create a depression or lowering of the groundwater level outside of that area. Some of our dewatering projects, some of the larger ones, have lowered the groundwater level up to 1,500 feet away from the construction site. And so because of that lowering, that really impacts some of our supply wells that are located in the downtown and Marymore Village area. So I wanted to briefly talk about some of the previous direction that we've received from council. In 2021, when we presented the triple bottom line analysis, we provided 5 different scenarios of what we could move forward with. The first scenario was transit-oriented, looking at lowering parking ratio, limiting dewatering, really relying on mass transit. The second scenario was basically status quo, small town feeling, keeping the building heights at the current level and ample parking. The third option was really focusing on staff workers and commuters by providing ample parking. The fourth scenario was an urban and local center focus, where we were going to increase building heights and lower parking ratios. And then the final scenario that we looked at was really economic focused, with the tallest building heights, ample parking, and maximum underground parking. We looked at up to 3 stories of underground parking there. So based on council direction, we went forward with analyzing scenario 1, which was a transit-oriented development, as well as scenario number 4, really focusing on these urban and local centers. So after the analysis coming back to council in 2022, the ultimate direction that we received was we were going to limit temporary construction dewatering, the duration. We were going to limit dewatering to elevator pits, footings, and utilities only within the CARA. And then to supplement, to make sure that we could still meet the density that we wanted to achieve in downtown and Marymore Village, we're going to decrease the residential parking ratio and increase the building heights. And those 2 items were done through the zoning code, the Redmond 2050 zoning code updates. So before we get into the code updates, I wanted to talk about where we are right now with our current development projects in the city. So there are 3 projects that are currently vested to the current dewatering standards as they exist today. One is it says active dewatering project, but as of 3 p.m. today, they actually finished dewatering, so that was great. They sent me an email saying they were done. So that's finished. Due to just a really dry winter, the dewatering rates were actually really low for that. It was only 180 gallons per minute, but this is not a typical year. There are 3 projects that are within the permitting stage right now. One has a development agreement that vests them to the current code right now. And then 2 projects are vested with a complete building permit. And all 3 of those projects are located in the downtown area. We also have multiple projects in right now that actually meet the proposed regulation. So they're only, saying that they're going to dewater for utilities or the footings or the elevator pits. So right now, our current dewatering standards, which were updated in 2022 with those interim limitations that council had asked for, dewatering is currently allowed for any structure. There's no limitation on what you're dewatering for. There are restrictions on rate, duration, and depth. If you recall, those were implemented in 2022. Additionally, we have restrictions for zones that do have some type of building height incentive. If you recall, in 2022, when we were working on the interim limitations, planning was bringing through proposed zoning amendments for town center, and they were getting additional building height to avoid dewatering, and council had requested that if they're getting the building height, then we need to not allow dewatering for parking garages. And so because of that, we updated as interim that if there are building height additions, then you can only dewater for the footings, utility, and elevator pits. So the proposed changes that we're talking about today is that we're within the CARA, we're only allowing dewatering for footings, elevator pits, and utilities. Additionally, we're going to remove the redundant interim restrictions that I just talked about for town center because we're moving to only allowing dewatering for those 3 items. So the rationale for these code changes for both really the water utility and the community, the development community, is it provides predictability for everybody. So for the water utility, we have a predictable groundwater supply where it's not getting lowered. We can still pump at the regular rates. It's predictable water quality. With dewatering, it can change the direction of flow. And so sometimes we're pumping water from a different area that has different water quality. Additionally, it provides predictability to groundwater monitoring. If you recall from the study session last year where we talked about our groundwater monitoring program, we have monitoring wells where we look at the quality twice a year, and we've strategically placed our monitoring wells so that they're upgradient of our supply wells to provide an early warning system. With dewatering, groundwater flow patterns can change, and our monitoring wells might not be in the right place if there's a dewatering project occurring. So for the development community, again, they have more predictability. Right now, construction schedules sometimes will dictate whether they're going to dewater or not. And so if they fall off their schedule, they might have to dewater if they're constructing in the winter. So we've had some issues with that. Additionally, it's pretty expensive to dewater, so they're saving costs by moving those parking structures above grade. And finally, it's easier for drought response. We do not allow dewatering when the city has activated their water shortage supply plan. It's much easier to come up with a mitigation if you're just dewatering a small area like an elevator pit compared to dewatering an entire underground parking garage. You have to core the concrete and then and let that flood. So it just gives them much more predictability for that. And for the development committee, we're really mitigating loss that they could have by increasing the building height and decreasing the parking ratio, as we heard from the presenters just previously, to offset that loss. So for the next steps, we're asking that this ordinance be put on the consent agenda. And I'm sorry, I have to coordinate. I think they said June 17th. Is that? Okay, great. June 17th, thank you. So that it can be concurrently adopted with the Redmond 2050 code updates. We'll continue to outreach to the stakeholders throughout this process so that nobody is surprised with these changes. And I'd really like to thank everybody for their time with this. Everybody's been very engaged, and I appreciate all the questions that we've had over the years. I also did just want to point out that this has been a great cross-departmental project. Planning has worked with us just step by step and has been a great partner with this. Additionally, finance has helped out, especially in the beginning phases, determining what the impact would be for the ratepayers. And finally, fire actually was a great partner as well, because some of the innovative parking ideas that we had didn't really mesh with some of the fire code. So I just wanted to point that out, that like Public Works has kind of been the face of this, but it's been a great cross-departmental project. So with that, I'd love to answer any questions.
Well, thank you so much. And I just specifically want to thank you for your work on this. I don't know how many years you've been working on it, but I know you're always the one coming to present to us about it.
I've been here 7 years and I've worked on it for 6 years, so it's been great.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much. This is wonderful. I'm so excited to have this. I will open it up to council questions. Councilmember Stewart.
Well, thank you so much. This might be a bit of a mutual admiration society here tonight, and I certainly want to thank my council colleagues here tonight, because this conversation predates my arrival on the council and was already well underway when I got here. So to see it come to fruition like this is really really special. So I just wanted to clarify, maybe for the listening public, there's been a lot of interest of late in what we're doing in our urban centers, particularly around space that we give for parking and things like that. So would it be fair to say, with the proposed solution before us that we're going to vote on in June, that the city of Redmond is not requiring this above ground parking, but rather we're offering it as a solution to the market so that housing would not be compromised, and allowing that additional height is part of that, and preserving the housing and making sure we're going to be building the housing that we need?
Yes, that's correct. We're giving this additional building height because we want to meet our growth targets, right, in downtown and Marymore. And we're also taking away the ability to dewater, so they can't go below grade. So yes, that's.
Yeah, thank you. I think that is important for the public to understand, so I really appreciate your work on this. And thank you for highlighting the cross-departmental functionality. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and I will note, as Councilmember Stewart mentioned, and you pointed out, in 2021 was when we had seen that triple bottom line analysis, and I remember, even though this is laid out, and now I do remember it laid out with the 5 buckets, I always remembered it as status quo, more environmental, most environmental, and us saying most environmental. But I think it was because they were rated across the triple bottom line, and 1 and 4 were really the most environmental kind of protection options. So I'll also just say kudos and thank you to my fellow council members for giving that direction. Council Vice President Forsyth.
Thank you. I am really excited to see this policy come through. I'm assuming you recall that I was super passionate about this topic when we first talked about it in my first couple years on council, and I just remember being kind of mind blown at the process and what it could potentially do to the aquifer, and to see us get to this point today where we're really protecting our groundwater and we're really being mindful about how we're moving forward and making those accommodations where we can, saying, yeah, the buildings are going to be higher, but we're protecting the future generations' groundwater. I think this is a really exciting moment for me in my time on council, so I really appreciate the work on this. Thanks.
Thank you.
Other questions? Mayor Bernie?
Well, I'll chime in since everyone else is chiming in on the excellent work on this by the entire team. And the dewatering and the CARA happened even before, while I was on council, so many moons ago. But I do appreciate all of the work that's gone on this. And I also really appreciate the opportunity for our city to kind of do all those things. We're creating the opportunity to build housing, and at the same time ensuring that the water in the aquifer stays what we need it to be. So I just think we came up with a really elegant solution to this, and I really appreciate all of the work and the compromises, I think, are all the parts made to make this happen. And I also appreciate not just the outreach to the community, but the development community as well. And I know that maybe some aren't 100% happy with this, but I think that the education process was really important, and so they understand the long-term importance of this work too. So thank you so much, Jessica, for doing this work. and your team and everyone else that was involved. But you've really been the face of this, so really appreciate it.
Well, thanks so much. One quick question, speaking of the development community, that I had was, is there any, for those couple of projects that you mentioned, especially the ones that are in the permitting phase, is there any possibility to incentivize them to follow the new regulations?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would have to talk to planning to see if they would be able to, since they're vested to this current code that includes the zoning. So I'm not sure. I can get back to you on that after speaking with planning.
Thank you. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions, so I'll just ask the counselor, are we good to send this to consent in June? Good, seeing thumbs up. Is there another step in the process? I saw you about to jump in.
Oh, no, I was going to say June 17th, I think is the
June
correct
17th.
agenda date.
Fabulous. All right, well, it seems like everyone here is supportive of us putting that on consent in June, or June 17th, and we will look forward to seeing it then. Thank you so much. The next item on our agenda is council talk time. We have one hopper item on our agenda, or as we call council policy proposals now. We did have a lot of discussion about these proposals at our retreat this weekend. And Councilmember Anderson has put forward a policy proposal, item number 14. Would you like to speak to this?
Sure, thank you. And I also wanted to note that because this was turned in prior to the deadline, but Councilmember Fields agreed to co-sponsor this item as well. But unfortunately, he's not here tonight. So the proposal. Hi. So,
hello.
The proposal this evening is another amendment that I'm hopeful, I'd like to ask council for consideration to move this into the bucket of updates to the personnel manual that were discussed previously at a different session. And the idea behind this was related to a couple of concerns that came up with the I'm trying to remember what my term was here. Salary commission, as well as the other items on when we adopted the CEO position, or I'm sorry, the COO position. The following proposal is including sort of the section 2.2, 2.02 personnel system and section 2 of the Redmond personnel manual general policies. So what's in front of you is a amendment to come into compliance with the existing declaration of council that and the intentions behind the establishment of the COO position, which was adopted prior to most council members except for Mr. Fields and I in 2018. We did make some amendments to it, I believe in late 2019 or beyond that. But the idea behind this, the mayor's role is an elected politician and it's not appointed or hired. Previously last year, we added we updated salaries for the mayor and council, and the challenging conversation we had around this was around sort of the balance of power and check and balance and equity in pay. So the idea behind this particular proposal is to ensure the intent of the position that was proposed by council for the chief operating officer, which is the main administrative role of the city, to delegate the final firing authority to the COO position. The regular staff, including the COO and the folks that are underneath the COO, do not serve, quote, at the pleasure of the mayor, unlike the department heads and the COO that are appointed by the council. So the mayor has some elected authority in that, and she specifically has limited authority to appointing a chief administrative officer, and it doesn't grant in the state law full hiring and firing authority to the mayor for all staff. So the fact that the state limits that mayor's authority, this can help with dispute resolution for line staff and hired officials at the appointed level that have been confirmed by the council. And so by establishing the COO position, we as a council created an official role that is the final authority in staffing and personnel and administration, and those disputes by virtue of this position, and it's often referred to in the personnel manual as the mayor's designee for administrative issues. So what happened was the personnel manual does not appear to have been updated at the same time we passed that initial establishment of the role. And so the proposal is to include one line additionally. I guess it's two separate actions. One is an update to the RMC 2.02050, which is terminations of positions confirmed by the council require notice from the council to the council from the mayor or COO and disclosure of the cause for termination to the city council prior to termination. This has come up a number of times previously as well. I would recommend that council considers that a separate update since that will require a code change. And then at the end of section 4, the appeal to the mayor as the final decision maker for terminations would be given to the chief operating officer in that administrative role. And so the amendment is simple and just changes the mayor to COO instead. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Are there any clarifying questions before we assess council's interest in moving forward or not on this item? All right. Not seeing any. I will ask whether council members are interested. I guess if we were to move forward with this, the next step would be to potentially have some sort of legal review or see this at an upcoming committee if this were moved forward on. Just wanted to clarify what the step would be. Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you. Councilmember Anderson was not present when we reviewed how we want to use the council hopper at our retreat this weekend. So a couple of the things that from that conversation that I just want to pull forward. And one of the things is actually that we wanted to self-regulate on the amount of time we spent deliberating on these items in council talk time. So we will be brief. And I appreciate that. I also appreciate that we agreed to be pretty direct with one another about the issues we'd like to continue seeing in the hopper and things that we would like to continue to explore, and that we'd like to use the hopper primarily for emerging issues, given that we have a full set of policy priorities already and a budget that we just adopted and a work plan that goes along with that. So for me personally, I am not interested in pursuing this proposal and do want to communicate that I'm not interested in entertaining further proposals regarding the personnel manual this year. Thank you.
Thank you. Council Vice President Forsyth.
Thank you. I'm curious to hear if any staff member could quickly speak to this item and the current processes.
Yes, I can. I'm not a staff member, but I'm the mayor. I will actually say we did have our legal team take a look at this, and this is not legal based on the role of the mayor. Is actually, I'm in charge of all of the staff, no matter who I have as my designee. And council can approve my directors, as you do, but the action of me terminating is not, I do generally let people know when someone is terminated. However, that's also my discretion and not up to the council to make a decision, and that is based on the state law.
Is there anything you could forward us from legal to that end?
I'll ask CO Files.
Okay, thank you.
It is in state law about what the role of, in our form of government. Right. My understanding is the way this document is written by Councilmember Anderson, it is somewhat undermining our form of government.
I see.
I don't know if CO Files has any more comment on that.
give a moment for our COO to come up to the table.
I don't know that I have any other clarifying comments from the mayors, but in talking with the attorney, it is pretty clear that the mayor has authority over all staff in the city, based on our strong mayor form of government.
Thanks for that clarification. I'll just add, before we do thumbs up, that I also am, I think given a lot of the other priorities that we're hoping to work on, I don't have interest on working on this or reviewing more changes to the personnel manual at this moment.
A rebuttal, please.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the intent is certainly not to undermine the form of government, as was quoted by the mayor. That is a misquote. The state law does limit the mayor's authority in appointing and removing a chief administrative officer or administrative assistant only. And the references are provided in this proposal. And additionally, this has come up in a conversation about checks and balances of power as well. So we just wanted to make sure that that's out there.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing that perspective and bringing this forward. Councilmember Fields.
Yes, thank you. So a couple of things, without understanding and without understanding the legal side of this, which I believe that Councilmember Forsyth suggested we might consider. I do think that Councilmember Anderson is correct that there is a requirement for checks and balances, and a position like this, I am interested in understanding, the possibilities here. But what really concerns me is the process. Two council members said, saying that they're not interested is I don't have a problem with that. That was the question, are you interested? But the reasoning for not being interested, that we have already set our agenda, really, in my mind, sort of perverts the whole point of the Hopper process. So if we're already set in our agenda and as to what we will look at and consider, then I have a real problem with the entire process. So the reasoning for not doing it did not sit well with me. If you just don't want to do it, fine, just say that. But then to make it sound like the process supports that position, I've got a whole problem with the Hopper process all of a sudden.
Thank you, Councilmember Fields. I will not speak for Councilmember Stewart, and I would appreciate if you wouldn't group our comments together, since I believe we made separate comments. For my part, what I was saying is that if part of this process with the Hopper is that we decide, do we want to spend more time of the council on anything, and do we want to advance on an idea? For me, when I think about the amount of different things that I'd like us to spend time on in our meetings, this isn't one that I want to spend time on. It doesn't have to do with the process. Another item might come forward that I feel that we should prioritize, and I would support that. So in this case, that's what I was expressing, and I'd appreciate you not putting words in other council members' mouths. Thank you. Councilmember Anderson.
The final comment on this was that we have already decided as the council to add the COO position, and the proposal would put us in alignment with that existing decision that we made prior. So it's more of an opportunity for the folks that weren't on council to update yourselves. Thank you.
Thank you. So I will ask council members, give a thumbs up if you are interested in proceeding with this, or you can give you a virtual one if you're online, or raise your virtual hand. All right, I'm not seeing a majority here, so we won't proceed with this. Thank you, Councilmember Anderson. Are there other items for council talk time? Council Vice President Forsyth?
I was just going to add on this one. I'm going to go do some research of my own. Given the conversation we had, I believe what the CO and the mayor are saying is accurate, but I will be doing some follow-up on my own accord.
Thank you so much. Councilmember Fields, or do you just have your hand up for a vote, or do you want to comment?
No comment, but actually a small comment. I was not putting any words in anybody's mouth. I was expressing what I had heard. So don't appreciate the pushback and making it sound as if I was trying to speak for somebody else. Never the case.
Yeah, I understand that, appreciate that. I also, if you push back on me, I might have to push back, and I do appreciate that we can have a respectful dialogue. Thanks so much, I appreciate that. All right, other items for council talk time? Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you, Council President. These might already be on your list, but I believe we did not get to finish our conversation at the retreat on our interests in the next couple of council conversations, format, location, neighborhood. So I'm hoping we can come back to that really quickly. And then we are meeting with the Lake Washington School Board on Monday, which was a former request that came through the hopper. I'm excited that that is happening, and wondered if we might spend a moment thinking about our kind of key questions and for that gathering, and any expectations that you may have from your conversations with the school board leadership.
Thank you. You got ahead of me. That was one of my questions for the council. So, you know, I think the question about the council conversations, maybe we can put that to the next study session, just unless anyone has anything on top of mine, just because we didn't kind of prepare council members to think about what they want on that. But if anyone, new ideas have come to mind, we definitely can talk about that at this moment. But I did want to find out, and that's great, thank you, appreciate you raising that, whether there are any topics. We have had a request from the Lake Washington School Board of what topics we'd like to put on the agenda. Council Vice President Forsyth.
I would love to know more around the current school lunch debt. I know, Council President, you and I had briefly talked last year about using our council contingency to potentially wipe out student debt for school lunches, among with other ideas of how to use that little bit of funding that we have. So I would love to know what that generally looks like, especially given the conversations at the federal level about removing those safety nets for our children in schools and not going hungry.
Wonderful. I'll add that to the list. Other questions or ideas? Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you. I do hope the conversation includes gaining a mutual understanding of our two bodies and our plans for the future in our community. We have studied and set a certain growth pattern through our comprehensive plan, and I know that the school board goes through their own planning process, and I think it would be helpful to understand where we are both planning for students to be in the future, and making sure we understand that we are on the same page and how we can continue to be so.
Thank you. That actually dovetails with a question that I was thinking about, since we have received some questions in particular about, you know, schools like Redmond Elementary, where as we see a lot of growth, the questions around, you know, how do we make sure that we have the capacity to support that growth within the school system. Council Vice President Forsyth.
Thanks. I was just realizing one more item that we've heard a lot about from community that I think we should have a discussion between the two governing bodies is the student resource officer. That's something we frequently hear about, and we make our own assumptions of what they're doing, and they make their own assumptions of what we're doing. So it would be great to just finally have that conversation together.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think it'd be good just to check in, since we've moved to that floating model, on how from the school board's perspective that's been going, especially because they also see across other cities. Anything else? Okay, well, as a reminder, that meeting is at the Lake Washington School Board's at the Lake Washington School District, and that's you should have a calendar invite for this upcoming Monday, the 3rd of March, at 5:30. That's when that meeting is 5:30 to 7 at the Lake Washington School District's location. So everyone, hopefully, if we can all be on time, make the most of our time together. Mayor Bernie.
Yeah, and we had already floated, I think, we didn't catch the lunch one, but the other ideas about what to talk about. But the agenda will just say interests that both of the district and the council want to discuss and the city want to discuss. And as a reminder, they are going to have dinner prior to the meeting. So the first half hour will be more socialization and dinner, and then the first half hour, and then the hour will be meeting time.
Great, thank you so much. And it's my hope that with the dinner piece too, part of the goal of this meeting is to get to know our school board members more and get to have more conversations about what's going on in our community. So thank you, Councilmember Stewart, for leading on this policy proposal initially. This is exciting to see this, and hopefully we will get a date set with the Bellevue School Board soon. Councilmember Stewart.
Well, on that note, one of the things we reviewed at the retreat this weekend was actually the spreadsheet, if you will, of the things that have come through the Hopper process. And we did, the council president was a co-sponsor of the initial request on these conversations. I do believe that the remit of the Hopper item has been completed. The remit specifically asked council leadership to pursue these meetings, and one has been secured. I think there's been effort on the other, and so I just want to acknowledge that work has happened, and the remit was to extend the invitation, and I believe that has occurred, and so I believe the item can be closed if council leadership agrees.
Sounds good. Yeah. Council Vice President Forsyth.
I still really want to see us get the meeting with Bellevue, so I'm not necessarily keen on closing it, but I also appreciate wanting to cross it off the list. So I know we're probably going to still keep trying. If we can get that commitment, then we can cross it off.
I think we could do some additional nudges, and if we're still not successful, I do appreciate the intent of that comment that if we don't succeed, we at least tried, and that's appreciated. All right. Any other items? All right, seeing none, then we can move on to the next item on our agenda, which is executive session. Oh, sorry, Council Vice President Forsyth.
I believe we were going to do the new item of discussing any ombuds.
Of course, yes, thank you so much for reminding me. Yes, so at our council retreat this weekend, we discussed that we wanted to open up at talk time if there were any items that have been coming to us through ombuds or through our emails that people wanted to raise any questions or ideas on as kind of pre-to Hopper issues. I have one in mind that I did want to raise, but we'll open it up to others first. Council Vice President Forsyth.
The one I know you were going to raise is the one I would like to talk about, so go for it.
Okay, great. I was going to raise, and I will note that I called the mayor about this earlier today, that we all received an email, or I think maybe several emails from residents that have been concerned about the switch away from auto pay on utility billing. And I know I personally missed a payment because of auto pay being turned off and immediately paid, for the record. But I just want to say for all the residents out there that even I think from some of our council members' perspective, it was a surprise. So I am interested, and I did call the mayor to ask what we might be doing about this, and just wanted to raise with the council that I think was, from my perspective, it wasn't the intention to turn off auto pay for all our residents when we said we wanted to recoup credit card fees. So Mayor Bernie, I don't know if you want to speak to that, but I just wanted to bring that up since we all saw that and to make sure that everyone knows about potential response we're looking at.
Yeah, we've ongoing commentary, and when the notification went out quite a few months ago, we started to get some feedback about that, including from my own household. I see that Dr. Cochran's online, but I did not give her a call today to warn her that this would be coming up, so I'm not going to put her on the spot. Oh, but she unmuted. But I will say that I think that there are two separate issues. I think the auto pay is separate from the fees. So, Director Cochran, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. I'm speaking a little off the cuff, so if I don't have information, I will certainly get back to you. The implementation of sort of the credit card fee recoupment did require us to disable the service of automatic payments from credit cards. We are not legally able to charge fees for those types of transactions per Visa requirements. And so we would be continuing to allow credit card payments, but not be able to collect any fee. That was a $600,000 expense to the city's utilities, about $200,000 to each one, to allow those recurring credit card payments without recouping. So we did have a really extensive communication process and plan, and I'll be happy to summarize that and share with council as well as city leadership all of those communication points. We can still do a direct debit from customers' checking or savings accounts, and we are working with our customers to transition them from their credit cards back to checking and savings account, as many had previously been set up. What else do I have to share with you? We are also working hard on ensuring that there is no fees, late fees, or anything applied to customers' accounts. And we will not be moving forward with any shutoffs due to these types of transitions if payments missed.
Thank you so much.
Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Director Cochran. My
Sure.
intention was not to put you on the spot, but more to raise whether council wanted to talk more about this or kind of look into any sorts of options. I'd still be interested in looking at whether there's any sorts of additional workarounds, especially on at least signing people up for the auto pay via the debit, since it seems like right now you have to download a form and fill out a paper thing that gets turned in. So we don't have to talk about it tonight, but if others are interested on the council in having some further conversation on this, just wanted to test the waters.
I think it would be worth having, having the council have a conversation at least in one of your committee meetings to kind of get a little more information. It is I think for most community members that I've heard from, the feeling is it's a little bit going back in time to have to mail in that voided check or give that information out. But I will share from other experiences I had out in the world, that is not an unusual thing. It just usually people are able to move away from that by being able to collect other fees, which we can't do. So I think that's the hang up that we have on that. But I know that Director Cochran and her team have been more than willing to share about the challenges with this, and I think it would be worth a longer discussion.
Yeah, I just would like to share that, I worked really hard to implement the recurring credit card payment option, strongly desired and warranted by, our customers. But at the time we implemented, there was not a cost. And, that cost is now essentially the price of, NFTE. So it does feel like taking a step backwards. I feel that greatly after working so hard to put it in place. But that is where we landed in terms of our financial goals. But happy to continue conversations.
Thank you. Councilmember Stewart?
Yeah, just a +1 for the continued conversation. And I just also wanted to give a shout out to the customer service team at City Hall. My understanding is they've met a lot of residents recently, and I just really appreciate their graciousness in this process. So thanks.
All right. Councilmember Vice President Forsyth.
I'll just add that, I think we need to continue the conversation on this, and whatever conversation we need to have to make this easier, if it's more education, if it's building out more on a website, if it's, maybe we have some sort of secure form instead of a paper form. I don't know what that looks like, but I think figuring out what all these options could be, because I do think it's having unintended consequences, and we're definitely hearing about it, and I definitely understand and support the reasons why we had to do it, but we're having some bumps in the road, so let's just keep the conversation moving.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no other hands, I think we can close out council talk time unless there's any other items anyone else wants to bring up. Okay. We'll move on to the next item, which is our last item on the agenda, which is executive session, potential litigation under RCW 42.30.1101I for 20 minutes. Action will not be taken following the executive session, and the meeting will adjourn at 8:46. Per state law, the executive session is closed to the public. Executive session participants attending remotely, please leave this meeting and join the executive session Teams meeting. Thank you.